All right, everyone, welcome to our recap coverage here of Survivor Series War Games. Now, we're going to be focusing in mostly on two different events because I think they tell kind of the bigger story. So, I want to start by talking about, the Dominic Mysterio and John Cena match, just because this leads us to our big event number one, which is the return of Liv Morgan. I thought WWE did a very, very good job of making it seem when she comes back that maybe she potentially is going to actually turn on Dominic Mysterio. Now, the reason why, this got people thinking was because they had kind of been setting up for this potentially happening, right? You saw kind of the before the injury to Liv Morgan, the issues with Roxanne Perez and her. Right now, Roxanne Perez obviously was getting closer to Dominic Mysterio. She's a tag team partner with Raquel Rodriguez. So you could see a world in which this was a storyline they were going to, and maybe they will go to in the future. However, it was just a bait and switch, and it ended up being the reason that Dominic Mysterio won. Now, they kind of needed to do this because number one, you don't want John Cena to lose too clean, right? You don't want it to be Dominic Mysterio beats John Cena. And you also can't have John Cena remain the champion because he only has one more match, right? And unless you planned on giving the guy in his last match the championship belt, you had to have him lose here. So, what better way than have him get screwed over multiple times in this match, right? He got screwed over multiple times. So, let's, keep thinking about that as it pertains to what happened in his final match. My guess is, depending on who it is, but they maybe are going to want something that ends more on the up and up, right? Just so it's not somebody getting screwed over. But in this case, Liv Morgan returns, makes you think maybe she's turning on Dominic Mysterio, then turns on John Cena. And I thought there was a lot of good that was in that match. It was one of those matches where on paper there was a lot of cool spots in there. I'm not sure they all hit the way WWE wanted to, but the ending did, right? Liv Morgan returning certainly did. The next event we're going to talk about, because like I said, these were just the ones that stuck out to me the most, was the men's War Games match to end the show, because I think this gives us insight into a lot of what's coming. Now, in my opinion, I really love these War Games matches, but I do think it's not that they're getting old, but there's something about, first of all, they didn't have the cages this time around, so it made it feel a lot less interesting until everybody got in there, I felt. Number two, they feel like they take a little bit too long to develop. The storylines don't develop the way they go, just being extended out this long. And I'm not against the War Games matches. When they first brought them in, I thought they were really cool. But these matches just seemed like they were starting a little bit slow and didn't pick up until the end. And that's part of maybe the War Games mystique. But in this case, I didn't know if in either match, the women's or the men's, that that length of time, I felt like it didn't really pick up until the end. But the men's had two major really events. Okay, the first one I think is Brock Lesnar, right? And why that's a big deal is because it's showing you what they're trying to portray. We saw it with the John Cena, match where he basically just destroyed John Cena. Now we see it again. They are pushing him. They are push. He is going to be in the main event scene at WrestleMania. There's no question about it. This was about as big of a push as you can give someone that just kind of returned. This was insane, right? And he was destroying everyone. Obviously, him and Roman Reigns. Is that something that ends up being a match? Certainly could be, but man, they from the moment Brock Lesnar got in there, he was dominating everybody. So it's going to be interesting to see where they go from here. But that was to me something that really stuck out, how dominant he was. Even when Roman Reigns comes out, Roman Reigns gets a few Superman punches on him, but then Brock ends up putting him through an announce table. So even in that interaction, you have Brock Lesnar getting the edge over even Roman Reigns. Thought that was a very important point to point out. But then, of course, the big moment of the night, which is a masked man who tries to make you think it's Seth Rollins. Maybe it is Seth Rollins. We don't know, but they're definitely doing all they can to kind of push you towards it being Seth Rollins, while also doing a little bit of a wink and a nod, like it can't be because he's injured. So my guess is it's not Seth Rollins, but he enters the match and basically screws over the team of Cody, CM Punk, Roman Reigns, Jay, and Jimmy Uso. Right? That's basically what we see here. And then we see a spear from Braun Breaker, ends the match, that team wins. So who that is, what that's leading to, I have no clue. I've been trying to think, ever since it happened about who could it even potentially be? Like, who are the options, and what would it mean for them? Who could it possibly be? It wouldn't make too much sense for it to be Seth Rollins, considering Seth Rollins just got screwed over by Braun Breaker, Paul Heyman. So it's like, okay, probably isn't him. So who in the world can it be? And I do think when you look at this pay per view as a whole, you had some really interesting matches and some good matches. The women's War Games match was good. It was really good. Had some cool spots. People were excited. Nothing wrong with it, right? The Dominic Mysterio John Cena match had its moments. I don't think it was anywhere near as good as like the AJ Styles match that John Cena had, but you have the return of Liv Morgan that really boosts that in a big way. Stephanie Vaquer, Nikki Bella, thought it was a good match. Obviously, a title match. Certainly good enough to be a pay per view match, and then this big match at the end was delivering. So this ending really gives us like it shocked us to the point of this is what's going to be talked about the most, right? Everything else here was kind of, in a way, final, right? What happened with Dominic Mysterio? Okay, the John Cena Dominic Mysterio, that little rivalry we've seen now is over. Stephanie Vaquer, Nikki Bella, who knows if that will continue, but Stephanie Vaquer gets the win, right? So this is really going to be the big story coming off it, and I'm very intrigued to see who this is. And I think WWE, they really have to, especially with we got John Cena's last match coming up. They really have to find that momentum going into WrestleMania. I think that what we've seen over the past few months is really the honeymoon of TKO being in charge, and Triple H being fully the boss. So even though he's been the boss for quite some time, obviously when Vince McMahon was still kind of running the show, now it's truly Triple H, right? And there's no influence from Vince in any way, shape, or form, from the outside even. So because of that, the honeymoon period, I think, for TKO and Triple H is over. And now they have to deliver for the fans. And I thought this pay-per-view was a little bit above average. I'd put it a B plus, right? If we're saying C is average, I think a B or B plus, depending, right? In terms of shock factor and kind of these big moments, you have the Liv Morgan return, right? Big moment. You have this masked man that enters the ring. Um, these are all payoffs for things. So in terms of shock factor, that's what can get you to that B plus. In terms of actual matches, I probably put it more towards a B or a B minus, just because as much as I love these War Games matches, and I do, it just feels like sometimes they take a little bit of time to really ramp up, and then it's at the end where, holy crap, it is like, at least even in an elimination chamber, there's a little bit of stakes even until everybody's in, right? There's still some stakes that are involved. In this, it feels like there's no stakes, because there's not. The match doesn't even fully start until everybody's in there, without seeing them actually, without having those little cages that they're in. I think that hurt this pay per view just slightly, but I thought it was good. And the beauty of a pay per view like this is that it really builds you to something bigger, right? Because we have this masked man. What is that storyline? And what's to come with Liv Morgan being back, considering Roxanne Perez is part of the Judgment Day and all of that. So thank you all for watching. We'll see you next time.